The Cave, a meditation for Christians. Imagine thousands of years ago, humans lived freely on open fields. They ate from the fruit trees around them, gathered fish from nearby streams, and ate plants, roots, and small animals they could snare in the fields around them. They never had shortage of foods, and lived long lives free of warfare and serious disease. But then difficult times came. There was a period of severe drought. The grasses and fields dried up. Their streams disappeared. Their plants and fish were gone. This was a time of severe hardship, and disease appeared in their midst they had not known before. Then rains came back, but different than before. These were angry and vengeful rains that brought with them lightning and fire. After the lightning brought fires sweeping through their fields, the intense rains flooded their world. But many of them found refuge in a cave. Imagine this cave, what it meant for the survivors that found it. Inside the cave were streams, clear and pure. In the streams were blind fish and crab, easy to catch and cook. Inside the caves were also mushrooms and edible fungi. Inside the caves was also safety. They could watch from the safety of their cave the disaster outside, and safely sleep in the embracing comfort of the solid walls of their cave. Imagine that the children of these survivors might have heard terrible tales of the outside world. Imagine they had been filled with fear about the outside. Imagine them journeying farther into the caves, perhaps beginning to carve out tunnels and rooms for themselves far away from the entrance. Imagine them adapting to an entire life spent inside the caves. Imagine this process continuing for 100 years. Imagine it continuing 200 years. Imagine this process continuing 1,000 years. Now, where are the descendants of the survivors now? They are deep, deep underground. They live their entire lives in shadowy candlelight, existing their whole life on the few food options given them by their cave world. They do not get much exercise, as their rooms are cramped and often crowded. Are there still people living outside the caves? Yes. The distant cousins of these cave dwellers still live in that same easy lifestyle, in those same rich fields. But they don't know much about the cave dwellers. The cave dwellers also know very little about the outside world. But there's one way for the cave dwellers to find out about the outside world, and even travel there. Imagine in the early days of the first survivors, that certain members of the clan were entrusted to journey out into the fields for additional nourishment. Maybe they brought back fish or fruits to supplement the diets of the clan, or maybe just wood and building materials. Maybe they were asked to go out and find fire or fuel if the fire had gone out inside the cave. Imagine these specific members keeping track of the tribe's progress as they journeyed deep into the cave system, periodically finding their way back to the cave entrance and marking their path. Imagine them teaching the next generation how to find their way out should the need arrive. Each generation would memorize and practice through a kind of a training ground the path they needed to take, feeling their way in case they should have no light, memorizing the path verbally, and once in their lives, at least, making the sacred journey all the way to the outside. They would then be asked to bring back a specific item to prove that they had really made it outside. Once they brought back this item, they were admitted to the leadership of the group. The leaders, the ones who had made it outside and back, would meet periodically to amend and update their memorized information the next generation would need to know in order for them to find their way to the outside. Imagine this group becoming something like we would call a church. They possessed a secret that other groups in the cave-dweller world just did not have. They alone possessed a knowledge of how to get outside. But the other people in the cave-dweller world were skeptical of this knowledge. They did not like the idea of their children believing in some other world that they just could not see. After all, wasn't the outside world filled with evil and death? They did not like the idea that this small group, this church, taught a way out of the cave to a world filled with bright light and color and something called trees. These people did not believe in trees. Many of them were convinced that this church was filled with ugly and unnecessary, perhaps even dangerous, superstition. They decided to create competing churches that each taught their own secret outside world. Of course, these other churches did not lead anyone anywhere close to the outside world. There was only one way to the outside world, after all. They had some kind of secret chamber that the members would work towards. The members would be asked to go this way and that, turning and crawling and walking and carefully wading through deep water to reach a sacred chamber that they called the outside. This chamber would be filled with secret drawings or carved objects, and when an initiate would return to describe what they saw, they would be admitted into the leadership of this so-called church. But it really wasn't the same thing as the real church, was it? Imagine a young man growing up in this dark, faintly lit world deep underground. Imagine he and his family had belonged to a specific church in this group of cave dwellers for hundreds of years, many generations. He himself had crawled and swum through difficult paths that his father and grandfather and even great-great-grandfather had crawled and swum through. He had seen what, for him, was ancient and sacred images, and he felt deeply moved by his struggle to see and hold these treasured objects. But something was still restless inside of him. His soul was troubled by this group, and he just could not rest. He was curious about the ancient church, and why was it that his family had forbidden him, or anyone in the family, from asking questions about it? He just did not understand how asking questions or reading books would be damaging to him in any way. But this was what his family had believed for generations. How could he question those beliefs? He just felt that there had to be more to this world than these deep, dark tunnels. This ancient church taught about an outside world that seemed more than just another dark room deep underground. He really believed that there might be a real outside, and this church might really have a way to it. His family all turned their backs on him for wanting to investigate this. He joined the ancient church, and within a few years, carefully memorizing and following every small instruction given him, not asking a lot of questions, just having faith in his teachers, he found himself walking outside into the full light of day. When he returned to the cave world of his family, he knew his family would not listen to him. He knew his family would not understand that a real outside world existed, and he'd actually climbed a tree. But the fun part was the wonder and amazement at how he could identify people who were members of his church, not by asking, but simply by sight. His family just could not figure out how he could do this. Of course, he understood that the bright sun of the day turned your skin dark, much darker than the cave light allowed. People inside the cave just did not know or understand this, but once you were outside, it became clear. The sunlight marked you. The climbing of trees and swimming in large bodies of water, just running in an open field. It gives you an unusual gait once you go back among the cave dwellers. People who were members of the ancient church, people who could make it outside and come back, can spot other members simply by their gait or the color of their skin, signs that were just invisible to the other cave dwellers who did not know or believe about the outside world. Eventually, God decided to end this cave world and began to have earthquakes and a volcano in the area of the cave dwellers' city. These warning signs were quite clear to the followers of the ancient church. They understood, and they tried to warn and bring their friends and family. They tried to bring everyone to the outside for safety. But many, many people, perhaps the majority, did not listen. Many followers of these other churches dove deep into their tunnels for the safety of their sacred outside spaces. Once the final earthquake came, they were all sealed forever inside the great mountain, and the entrance to the cave was forever closed. But the followers of the ancient church understood what had happened. They were outside long before the end. They lived forever in their green fields among their distant cousins in a world free of hunger and serious disease, free of war and violence, free of ignorance and fear.